And joining me now is foreign policy analyst Jan Techau. He works for the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Welcome to you, Mr. Techau. So first of all, what are the implications of the INF treaty being virtually dead?
Well, I mean, we have two things, I think, that come out of this mostly. For the first part is that, you know, the European security architecture, as we've known it, and its nuclear part, are now, you know, wide open again. This was an entire class of missiles that was prohibited to own in Europe. Moscow has violated this for the last 10 years, roughly. And even under the Obama administration, it was clear that the Americans were quite unhappy with the state of affairs and therefore also withdrew. But it also, and this leads to the second point, means that Europe is only really a strategic side consideration in all of this, because the real reason why both Russia and the United States want out of this treaty is China. China is not part of the treaty. And therefore, it was not forbidden for China to own these kinds of missiles. And it has invested in these kinds of missiles very massively over the last 20 years. And America and Russia want to be able and have the capability to have these missiles again to get parity, strategic parity with China.
So you've raised a lot of very interesting questions. But before we continue our conversation, I would like to mention that we are expecting the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, to make a statement on behalf of NATO. We are monitoring the situation, as you can see in the box there. We are waiting for him to arrive. And as soon as he starts speaking, of course, we'll take you live there. Now, Mr. Techau, we heard earlier what Secretary of State Pompeo of the United States said. He clearly blamed Russia for the collapse of this INF treaty. You seem to be indicating it is Moscow's fault. It was in violation of this treaty for the past 10 years. So it was clearly only Russia's fault, do you think?
Yes, I mean, for the most part, it has to be said that this treaty has been violated by Russia first and quite systematically. And this was already a concern in previous US administrations. And it is, you know, universally shared among NATO member states and among the expert community that the missiles, SSC-8 missiles that Moscow has developed and put in place in range of Europe are nuclear capable and have therefore violated the INF treaty for quite some time. That is not really any longer under dispute.
Okay, so let me interrupt you there. We see Jens Stoltenberg is about to speak. Let's take a listen to what he's saying.
The INF has been a landmark in arms control. It eliminated an entire category of nuclear weapons, making us all safer. Today, the INF Treaty ceases to exist because Russia has deployed the SSC-8 missile system. The new Russian missiles are nuclear capable, mobile, and hard to detect. They can reach European cities with only minutes of warning time. And they lower the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons in armed conflict. All NATO allies agree that these missiles violate the INF Treaty. And Russia continues to develop and field these systems despite years of US and allied engagement, including a final opportunity of the last 6 months to return to compliance. We regret that Russia showed no willingness and took no steps to comply with its international obligations. As a result, the United States' decisions to withdraw from the treaty is now taking place. This decision is supported by all NATO allies, because no international agreement is effective if it's only respected by one side. Russia bears the sole responsibility for the demise of the INF Treaty. There are no new US missiles in Europe, but there are new Russian missiles in Europe. NATO will respond in a measured and responsible way to the significant risks posed by Russia's SSC-8 system. We have agreed a package of measures to ensure NATO's deterrence and defense remains credible and effective. But we will not rush to implementation or make any rash moves. We will consider our options carefully. we have decided to work on issues such as exercises, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, air and missile defences, and conventional capabilities. We will also ensure our nuclear deterrent remains safe, secure and effective. Some of these measures can be implemented quickly and others will take time. Everything we do will be balanced, coordinated and defensive. Allies remain firmly committed to the preservation of effective international arms control, disarmament and non-proliferation. We will not mirror what Russia does. We don't want a new arms race. And we have no intention to deploy new land-based nuclear missiles in Europe. NATO continues to aspire for a constructive relationship with Russia when Russia's actions make that possible. And with that, I'm ready to take your questions.
Okay, we'll go to Associated Press right here.
Secretary General Lorne Cook from Associated Press. You haven't given us much detail as to how NATO...
So you were just listening to Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, talking about NATO's response to the end or the demise of the INF Treaty. And with me, I still have foreign policy analyst Jens Techau. He works for the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Now, Mr. Techau, you listened to what Jens Stoltenberg said. He talked about a very credible and responsible response from Europe, and he outlined a couple of kind of ideological things about we want it to be a balanced, coordinated and safe response and whatever. But he gave hardly any details. What did you make of what he said?
I mean, this was pretty much exactly the announcement he made 5 weeks ago in the end of June, when he said almost verbatim the same things. Air and missile defense, all very defensive. And so it's quite clear that they do not want to reveal any details at this point. It's no secret that, you know, especially the United States has been working feverishly on coming up with a possible response, a technological response to the missile systems that Russia has developed, but they're not deployable yet, they're not operational yet. So NATO is in a bit of a bind. It really can only react in passive ways with existing systems, but it doesn't have any kind of immediate quick fix that, you know, will solve the situation.
So NATO is principally responding to, according to what Mr. Stoltenberg said, the SSC-8 missile that apparently Russia has developed, and he said it could be used very secretly. It's difficult to detect, and it could reach European countries. He also said, we do not want an arms race, but from what you are saying, that the US is also trying to build something which could match the Russian missile. So we are seeing an arms race start already?
Yes, there's a risk for an arms race. There's no arms race yet. But it is quite clear that when you have one treaty party, in this case Russia, violating the treaty, then the other side at some point must respond, or otherwise it loses its credibility in this game of deterrence. So we will eventually see some sort of response. Mr. Stoltenberg just now was very eager to make clear that these weapons, these responses would be defensive systems, air defense, for example, missile defense. These are not offensive weapons. But in the end, the risk of an arms race is huge, because it's quite clear that a situation where one side is significantly stronger on the nuclear power side, that situation will be balanced out eventually.
Stoltenberg also talked about we have a range of options which we'll now consider. What are the options that NATO has now to deal with this situation?
I mean, there are several options now. First of all, on the technological side, how do you respond? What kind of missile systems do you want to put in place? Where do you want to put them in place? But then the more significant question in terms of options is, who is actually going to get involved? Is this an American job primarily? Are these American systems? Are we talking about a European deterrent that needs to be developed? Should America be less interested in balancing the situation out? You know, it's quite clear that, you know, some European countries would probably be quite eager to host these missile systems, should there be some, and others not. So we have an internal European divide also. So yes, there are options, but at the same time, there are also various problems with these options, which of course he's not talking about. But for NATO to find a cohesive response that also matters and is relevant in this situation is quite difficult.
Absolutely. And you also mentioned, of course, that, I mean, Europe is kind of very, very affected by this kind of the demise of the INF Treaty. Jens Techau, thank you very much for that analysis. Thank you very much.